Hello, everyone, and this is Jack, and
This is Tony.
this is Good Morning, McCraig. Now we're it feels great saying that after a few weeks without honestly. So we are coming at you with it's our third podcast, but really episode number 2, as our first one was really just a proof of concept and trial. So the last couple episodes we've sort of talked here and there about various things, tournaments, the balanced data slate. And today, we're going to start off talking about what we're doing for hobby, some upcoming events, and then I am going to spend a few minutes just talking about Orks, Speed Freaks, and, sort of the general use of Speed Freaks. And we'll talk about a few games that we've played, and then we are going to start talking about what we might be doing in the next episode. So stay tuned towards the end to hear us out with that. So how have you been doing, Tony?
Not too bad. Not too bad. The only things I've gotten done over the last few weeks is a Necron Overlord and a Necron Royal Warden to more or less finish out the list that I've been building. So now that that's done, I got a game in on that, and that wasn't too bad.
So what's your general list?
So the general list I have for the Necrons is 2 20-man blobs of warriors with a 5-man blob of immortals. We have the Nightbringer Catan and 2 groups of 3 scarabs, 6 of the Scorpic destroyers, 3 of the regular destroyers, the ones that can actually shoot, and not the new heavy destroyers, and 6 wraiths. So, and also, what's it called? The Cesras, and I'm just lost for his words. He's the named Cryptek that got a new remodel a year or so ago. What was that?
Is it the Infinite? Is that him?
No. This guy is lore background. He is the one who more or less invented the biotransference method. So he's the one
that's interesting.
So he's one of those cold characters that's like an evil scientist kind of thing, where very much crazy and very much like that Emperor's Children apothecary.
Yeah, I don't like that guy.
Yeah, Fabius Bile.
Yes.
Yeah, they're very kindred spirits in that regard. In terms of that mad, crazy, they're just, all about the science with zero morals or ethics.
Right.
So
the ends justify the means totally and completely.
Exactly. So I gave him a go because he has an ability where he can buff a core unit for the rest of the game, and he can do that at the start of every phase. And if he kills any models in the melee in the fighting phase, he can buff another unit immediately. So he can increase their toughness, their strength, or their ballistic skill. But it's what he increases is random. But I'm doing the Novak dynasty, which is the melee focused dynasty. So even Necron warriors can be surprisingly deadly in melee. And because of that, all 3 of his buffs on Necron warriors is awesome. You can buff them to be, if they're T5, that's probably the best. But other than that, even if they were an extra strength or an extra ballistic skill, that makes them considerably more dangerous.
I've even before Necrons got the balanced data sheet and got their core update, I played a 1,000-point battle between Sisters and Necrons, and with I tried to take out a blob of 20 Necron warriors, and I shot them, and I couldn't shift them, and I charged them with 3 of the the Sisters battle suits, the Nundums, if you will, and
Nundums, I love it.
and I knocked them all down to there were 6 models left, and then the characters just buffed and healed and buffed and healed, and suddenly there's a squad of 14 right back in my face, and then they just cut my suits down, the Paragon war suits. They just cut them to pieces, and it was just the numbers just chopped me down, and it was really sort of heart-wrenching to put all that effort in over the span of 2 turns, shooting and shooting and shooting everything, and then knocking them down to almost nothing, and then just seeing them all come back and rip my heart out.
Yeah, I was actually facing Sisters for my first game with them the other week, and I ended up losing, but it was similar in the sense that neither one of us were able to really push on each other, mainly because of how the terrain was set up. We were using the terrain setup that GW recommends for tournaments. So neither one of us had line of sight on each other until we were both right in the middle. So up until turn 3, I don't think either side lost more than 100 points. And then by the end of turn 3 or possibly turn 4, now both sides have lost, 1,600 points. All of a sudden it was just it was really bloody. So, but I think
in the case of Necrons, not bloody so much as oily, but
yeah, yeah. But yeah, it's overall, I think the list did well. I was starting to see certain limitations with the list because if you have the 2 blobs of 20, the kind of problem is that I don't really have it's hard to keep both blobs together enough so that way they can benefit from buffs and overlapping goodness, but also, I need them to spread across the board to be able to take objectives, and could not really do that with this, at least for that particular game. So I'm thinking more instead to drop one of the blobs, so that way I can keep the core blob and have that buffed, so that way I have my resurrection orb. I have the ability to fall back from combat and still shoot and charge and things like that. And I can buff them with my will be done and all of these other aspects. Whereas as soon as they spread out across the board, all of that is lost, at least on one of them.
Right. And then maybe you can, with the points left over, get things that can move a little faster to get to those objectives earlier.
Right. One thing I'm definitely thinking of is actually have a 10-man unit of Immortals and swap out either the named Cryptek or the Royal Warden and give it to a Chronomancer instead. Have the Chronomancer have the ability with the Veil of Time, so that way they can teleport, and you will teleport with the 10-man unit of Immortals with Gauze. So now all of a sudden I have, 20 Gauze shots, probably in your backline somewhere, able to fire and to do some serious damage. Because when you use that Veil of Time, the unit that brings with you, and you can only bring one unit, has to be wholly within 6 inches. That's why a 20-man blob's not feasible.
Right. Oh, so it's interesting, that wording. It's so important because I do recall back every edition and every new Orc Codex, the custom force field has changed that wording slightly, and wholly within or within is such a huge component to how you move your army around, and having something wholly within can be so limiting.
Yes, especially when you're talking like some simple 6-inch aura or something like that. And I don't think with the Veil of Darkness that there's a way for you to increase that aura, because it'd be different if it'd be like, oh, I can increase it to maybe 9 inches or something like that. Well, maybe I'd be able to fit him. The only other thing that I could possibly do with that is, possibly have a Chronomancer teleport with, say, those 6 Scorpic destroyers. Because with Novok, you have the like +1 to charge. So you'll have an 8-inch charge range, which, is not bad. But I would kind of prefer to have the Immortals, because then you're guaranteed 20 shots.
Correct, yeah.
So, and, you possibly be on an objective, so that way you don't want to move, and you can give them a 5-up invul. Or give a 5-up invul to something else and then move it, or what have you. So there's lots of options, but I need to play the list a few more times to see how it is. But overall, I was pleased.
Yeah, that also brings me to a point, something I've been thinking about a lot. I know you play in a lot of tournaments, but I've run a lot of tournaments over the past few years, and one of the things I noticed is, if you look at who's dominating sort of in the meta, right, you still see Drukhari as sort of the top end.
Yeah, that hasn't moved. Despite their changes, that hasn't moved at all.
But that doesn't mean that a guy like me can go buy a Drukhari list and play it and then be the winner of a tournament.
That is true.
Without, right, like you really have to take a list and play with it multiple times in order to really find the balance, to find out how, as a player, how you play, like what you have for habits, and refine a list. And I feel like, when we talk about, the meta, right, it's not just a list. It's also how you interact with the list, knowing the list and what it does, and being able to act and react on the battlefield with each mission. And I think that's one of those things that people, because I've seen this, and I'm sure you have in events and tournaments where people show up and they have, I have the newest list, the newest hot meta list. And it's like, yeah, well, how many games have you played with it? And if they haven't, in fact, I had somebody walk out of a tournament after losing round 1 and just was like, but this is the list that's supposed to be winning. It's like, well, how many times did you play with it?
Yep.
None. You haven't played with it, is the answer. Or you've only been playing casual games and not against people who are like well versed in the game itself, right? So
right. Yeah. I remember we might be talking about the same person, because it was one of the tournaments that you had, and I faced a gentleman who had he brought a Chaos Demon list. This is an 8th edition. So Chaos Demon list. And it was a mix of, how do you put it? You had the Chaos Demons, you had some Chaos Space Marines, specifically the new, I'm trying to think of its name. It's a new guy that like he rides, and he also heals demon engines, right?
It rides on the big old sort of spider horse thing.
I cannot think of
spider scorpion horse thing, yeah.
I can't think of its name, but like he brought like 3 of those, lots of the plague bearers, and this was back when you can have like the -2 to hit them or what have you, maybe -3, and it was just a ridiculous like tough army for all intents and purposes. And he could bring down some some of horrors, they could deep strike in and shoot. But
right,
overall, I brought my Dark Angel list with a side of knights, right? Like a knight and two of its the little guns, and I was bringing largely like a mix of Dark Angels with some Ravenwing and some Greenwing. So I kind of just like, all right, I'm just gonna stay back because you're super slow. I'm just gonna stay back and shoot you. So he, for 3-4 turns, he was trying to come after me, and most of his units were these slow units that had no range. And I just...
Right.
And at the end of that, he was, because that was the latest list that he got from the internet. And it did not do well. And then after that was done, he was, all right, I'm out. Bye. And took off.
Yeah. It might be the same guy. And so it's just sort of, when we talk about tournaments and events, and it all depends on what you're doing. I mean, casual events and narrative events, awesome, bring what you want, but when you're going to a tournament and you can't just buy a new army, throw it on the table and expect to do well without serious amounts of practice. And that's one of the reasons that later in this episode I want to talk a little bit about war bikers in particular for the Orks, because I've been using them all wrong forever. And so I've been really looking into ways to be more effective with them, and sort of looking at and examining my play style compared to the strengths of the unit. So, but let me shift back to kind of talk a little bit about some of the things that I've done hobby-wise.
Mm-hmm.
So last episode I talked about my slow grow Black Templars. And I did make some progress on building a bunch, and I got started. I did my 2 sort of proof of concepts, one on a neophyte and one of the Primaris Initiates for the Crusader squad. So I've built the entire squad out for 10 models. And then one of the great things about this kit is you have so many options that all these options get left unused, that I use to make a full Primaris generic intercessor squad with Templar, all their iconography. And I've kitted them out with pouches and grenades and all that fun stuff. And then I built a Sword Brethren squad. And I just built it for coolness, but I'm probably going to have to go back and actually make a list and see what I actually can fit, or what it looks like at 500 points or 1,000 points with these Sword Brethren, because I mean there are a lot of different options in that kit, and you could go crazy and take a whole bunch of options. But once you do that, how effective is that unit when you have suddenly like, oh, I have one, I have one paired lightning claw, I have one power axe, I have one power fist, right? Like it just starts getting cumbersome as a unit. So I'll probably end up taking a look at that. And not that I'm going to be playing that anytime soon. It has a ways to go before I have paint on all of those guys. But fundamentally, I built a good starting core with 2 troops, an elites, and I have a marshal assembled. So I'll just be slowly painting those up over the next couple months.
Okay. What other, you said, what do you got for the elites on there?
So elites would be the Sword Brethren. And I can probably do a Castellan, because I just don't know if there's a bunch of green stuff work. One of my complaints with the Sword Brethren squad is sort of the capes. I love the capes. I like how they look. Not all people are using the capes. You can take them off, but I like them. It'll make it a little harder to paint, but they wrap one side of each model has a cape section that wraps around one of the pauldrons. Super cool looking, but it doesn't really match up well. And so I need to go back and clean up all those joins with green stuff. So that's sort of this week's project, is to try to green stuff up, a bunch of stuff so I can get them primed by the end of this week.
Okay.
Other hobby stuff though isn't really 40K related. So, I did some Necromunda stuff. I did a couple Marvel Crisis Protocol terrain pieces to drop off at my local shop. But otherwise, it was mostly focused on the Templars and poking around at Necromunda, because I'm in the middle of a little Necromunda campaign. But this Friday, I have a 40K game, which is exciting. And then, and you and I are planning on trying to get together soon to play. So we'll see how all that shakes out.
Yep. I'm looking forward to that. I don't even know what I'll bring. So we'll see how that goes.
Yeah. So let's take a, if you're willing to, let's talk about this new upcoming Chaos and Eldar box. That's really the only new major release that's upcoming, because it's the holiday season and their GW kind of slows down on the releases.
Right. I'm very glad about, obviously the new sculpts that you're going to have, especially on the Eldar side. But even on the Chaos side, you have the, Chosen and Warpsmith. The thing that comes to my mind, I'm not familiar with the Eldar in general. They're probably, as a whole, a faction that I like the least. So I don't follow them very much. But I know on the Chaos side, like the Warpsmith is at least as he is right now. Now, we know that when GW usually updates a model range or updates a specific character or something like that with a new model, usually that model also gets a drastic revamp in rules, or at the very least, much better than what they were.
Yes.
But like right now, the Warpsmith is not too great, right? Unless you're Iron Warriors. If you're Iron Warriors, that's a different story. And even then, like, it's good. It's fluffy to have an iron, their engineer as their leader, the Warpsmith. But then you have, the Chosen, and the Chosen are probably some of their, it's like they're veterans, right? They can equip anything.
Yeah. Yes.
So I'm kind of definitely curious to see how that's going to go. I'm hoping they don't remove choices, because right now the Chosen can have pretty much anything, right? They can do your Thunderhammer Storm Shields, right? I'm hoping they don't remove that and limit you to just the kit.
Well, I'm hoping that it's similar to the Sword Brethren kit, because they just piled in a ton of different options for the unit. It's like for every 5, one can do this and one can do that and one can do this. So I think you'll probably have something like that. So gone will be the days of like 5 guys having a power maul. But I think everyone will be able to either have a bolt pistol and chainsword, a bolt pistol, and one other type of close combat weapon, power maul, thunderhammer, stuff like that, or all bolters. That would be very similar to the Sword Brethren kit. Remember the last time these models existed in plastic was Dark Vengeance. So,
yeah. I think I still have a bunch. I think I have like 2 or 3 of those sets all built and just sitting in a drawer because I never bothered to paint them. Never really got the Chaos Army off the ground. But yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to seeing, those models, more of those models and those rules. As far as the Eldar is concerned, my understanding is that Autarch, their character, they made it so that way, which is something that you don't really see nowadays, especially since the whole, once they started releasing Primaris, is that you have a very customizable, generic leader.
yes.
Because they've been all either very monopose or maybe just 2 different poses. But it seems like this one has multiple options to do what you want to do with it.
So I and this is me just speculating, but when it comes to Primaris leaders or characters or any sort of specific lieutenant captain type model, they're selling those like every time. I don't think that Eldar have the same selling power. So you're not going to make a lieutenant with storm shield and power sword, and then a lieutenant with heavy bolt rifle, right? With the Eldar, though, you're not going to generate the same number of sales. So what you do is you're like, well, there are going to be 3 head options, 3 weapon options, stuff like that. Because I don't think, just based on what I've seen in the past, when Wake the Dead and Death of the, I can't remember that box set that came with all the other, it came with a new Dark Eldar, new Eldar, what was it, the Howling Banshees?
Yes.
They just didn't generate any sales. And then when they released individually, they still didn't generate any sales. And I think Eldar are harder. So, which is interesting to me that they've released 3 new Eldar kits. So you have the Scouts, not the Scouts, the Rangers, and you have the Rangers on jet bike,
which is a brand new kit, like totally new kit, which is interesting. And they're accompanying it with an older kit. So everyone that already has Rangers, they're probably not going to buy these plastic kits, but they'll have to buy this box if they want those cool new bikes. Again, though, with the backup of codexes, we still haven't seen the Custodes or the Gene Stealer cults, and we know Tau is on the way, and we might see a new Tau model tomorrow. But all of these models are going to come out, but I don't see a codex coming for a while for Chaos or Eldar. So yeah, they haven't been dropping any previews or anything like that. So I'm willing to bet that by the end of January we'll have Custodes, we'll have Gene Stealers, and we'll have Tau, or at the very least we'll know when Tau's coming out.
Yes,
but what's coming afterwards, we'll see. But yeah, I don't know what's going to be coming with with those other 2 factions. And like, as far as like the Eldar is concerned, like, don't get me wrong, the models all look great, right? Everything looks great because, it's Games Workshop. Like, it's so rare that they miss the mark in terms of visual design. However, like, for me personally, not necessarily just because it's Eldar, but like, they're Rangers, right? They are scout units for all intents and purposes. And me personally, I am not a fan of scout units. I prefer the, something that's more heavy duty, something, either in power armor or something that can take a punch, whereas the scouts, in general, don't.
They definitely don't. I think that this is sort of, both of these armies fit a very thematic army list, right? The Chaos side is a very Iron Warrior like, right? You have your Warpsmith, you have some veterans, you have a big old demon machine mix, like really cool Iron Warriors. Got it. And the other side, it's like, it's a very scout based list with probably a semi-tough leader with some heavy firepower. And like, look, they all have sniper rifles. They're all going to sit back and do some snipering. And all of that is cool. Don't get me wrong. I just don't have any interest in it, right? And that's really what it comes down to. It's neat. I'm glad that both lines are getting a refresh, but I just don't have a ton of interest in this box whatsoever.
Right.
Right.
I'm in the same boat. I know I'm going to pass on it. One thing I am kind of curious on, and what you mentioned where like the Eldar sales, they're just kind of not there, not in comparison to say the, Space Marines, of course. But I'm curious if that is also kind of like the Sisters problem that they had for a long time, in that, these ancient metal models, no one's really playing Sisters unless they're, they want to specifically hobby on hard mode with these metal miniatures that were hard to find.
Right.
Until they finally refreshed the entire line.
But Sisters not only got a refresh, but they got an updated codex. They got new units. So the Sisters got a refresh, and they've had actually, since their refresh, they've had like 3 additional waves of miniatures, right? So the question is can they generate the sales with Eldar in that way? Can they update the book to make it meaningful? Because while Sisters aren't top tier, they're certainly in the conversation for like the top 5.
They're definitely very capable in the right hands.
And I just don't think right now Craft World's Eldar is anything really to speak of. I think the Drukhari, and you have, I think, you have a list of mixed Eldar, I think, that is doing some stuff, right? But otherwise, Craft World's by itself, and certainly not Rangers. But we'll see what happens with this new. Maybe they do get a codex that makes them meaningful and relevant and fills the Eldar players' coffers.
There's been a lot of rumors about that have been trickling out in regards to like the Eldar codex. So, like, for example, a lot of their Wraith units, like their Wraith Lords and things like that, those are all going to get the Dreadnought treatment in terms of -1 damage.
Okay.
Right? So make them much, much more capable absorbing damage and things like that. That in the book itself is supposed to supposedly merge Harlequin as well as the other faction. I can't think of its name off the top of my head. The one where you get powers from death kind of deal.
Yeah, the Dead Elves. Yeah.
The Dead
Ynnari.
Elves.
That's
the Ynnari. There you
faction.
Go. So you get them as well. And that they're just going to incorporate all of that into the Craft World book. And then you got Drukhari doing on its own, possibly even having Corsairs in there, which was a faction more from Forge World.
Right.
Which I think totally went away in 8th.
It did. Yep.
So yeah, if they bring that back, that would be great. But yeah, I definitely think that like the Craft World is definitely not great. Harlequin can be super scary in weird ways because they're, stupid space evil elf clowns. But
and they zip around, right? That's the thing, is they get across the battlefield quickly.
They can get across the battlefield very quickly, and they generally, if I remember properly, have a hollow field, so they're like 4-up invul across the board.
Right.
So, and they can be pretty scary in melee, and they have some, specific characters that are very, very scary, very, very deadly, and can do some crazy things. But right. I mean, we'll see what they end up doing. I've never really seen, at least in my opinion, I could be wrong, where the Eldar, even with their older models, even with everything else that moves in the meta, that the Eldar generally still, maybe not necessarily remain on top, but they're usually very competitive at near the top. Because they have all their trickery that's just baked into them, and that can throw a lot of people off.
Right. Yeah, I'm not really sure how people are doing right now with psychic shenanigans. I know Grey Knights have kind of shifted towards the top They've been appearing a lot more regularly, but Thousand Sons have not. And then if, Eldar always have some sort of sneaky psychicness.
Okay.
So I don't know. I just don't know enough about the faction, and the truth is I don't really like them.
I mean, I'm in the same boat. I know that they have some stuff that allows them to, they got their move, shoot, move. They also have, their psychic trickery, and they have some stuff that is deceptively powerful, like the Dark Reapers with their whole, I'm going to hit you on a 3 no matter what, to hell with your minuses to hit or anything that to manipulate my ballistic skill. And also their, those guns have scary range and scary damage profiles, right? Little things like that. So
yeah,
they have ways to do work. It's just, now that everything else is being buffed, I think half the armies are buffed right now, and the other half are kind of either falling completely behind, or they are waiting, or not waiting, but they have like a half update, like Tyranids have that Hive Fleet Leviathan update. Right. And they just recently got a update to make like a Nidzilla list more viable, where anything that's a monster is going to have -1 damage and a 5-up invul. But at the cost is that you can't take swarms, and you can't take anything that has 1 wound.
Right. And so there's really interesting, because you look at Tau, who in 8th were just the most effective, like that you could castle and do tremendous amounts of aura buffs. But now Tau are not even really in the conversation. So the hope is that as a new codex comes out, everything reconfigures and rebalances, and we see what happens.
Yeah, I don't know, because how do you put it? I feel with Tau, the problem is less their units, though obviously that is a factor, and more just the shift in how the game is played. In 8th, the game could be played by, you mentioned it, you could castle, and usually depending in the terrain situation, line of sight blocking was not as prevalent. So all of a sudden, you can, the game favored creating a leaf blower list. You set it, you overlap all these buffs, and you basically obliterate everything in your path, and then you grab objectives and hold for the end of the game. That's not the case anymore. You can't really castle effectively, a ranged castle specifically, because you have line of sight blocking and the points are progressive. So Correct. You got to spread out. So that breaks up that whole, this is how we play Tau. So now you have to hold the middle ground, and you got to spread out, which means you got to spread out your buffs, which makes units and certain strategies not as effective because the buffs aren't going around as well. All of that. So, and they don't really have anything that's good at holding the midfield. Like the closest you're going to have is the battle suits, but the battle suits can easily get chopped through. A group of berserkers don't care about your battle suits.
Right. And also 10 Space Marines, 10 Intercessors, if you're in the middle of the battlefield and you're on an objective, 10 Intercessors, 20 Sisters of Battle. Like 6 Warbikers are going to be able to shift you pretty quickly from that with shooting. And that's before you even get into like close combat units that once you're in the middle, most of them will be able to get to you. I just think Tau, the 8th edition Tau Codex didn't evolve well into 9th, and nobody's really found a way to play it to maintain a level of competitiveness. I think there are still some amazing ideas with Tau, but we won't. Hopefully, we'll see a codex for them by late February, and we'll see what happens, because I think they're coming after Custodes and Genestealer Cult.
Yeah. Well, we'll see. I mean, hopefully it gives them a significant power boost and they're able to do what they need to do. I'm just thinking the core problem in my mind is that how are they really going to hold objectives? In the sense of, they don't have like an equivalent of like Terminators that can be like, all right, I'm going to take this objective. I got storm shields, I got two up, 1 up armor, come move me. And
I wonder if that mobile terrain they had factors in. It becomes a bigger part.
I don't know.
Like if you want to hold an objective, you basically put a giant moving barricade on top of it and just sit there and say, okay, try to take me and my shield barricade off this objective. I wonder if that becomes a part of the overall strategy.
I don't know. We'll see.
It's
we'll like see. A month away. So what did you wanted to talk about in terms of the Orks and your buggies?
Well, I had mentioned before we started the podcast today about going against the Chaos list, and it had a Be'lakor. So it was a Chaos Space Marines list, and it had Be'lakor. And so I made a really rookie mistake where I really got angry at the fact that Be'lakor was just not dying and was just like any unit that got close just got wiped away. And so that I made that mistake where you just say, well, to hell with everything else. I'm putting everything into this guy. And so by doing that, I effectively took myself out of the game. And I just fed Be'lakor. And he does that thing where he's like, oh, okay, well, I'm down to 4 wounds, but hey, I'm going to heal myself back up. Or, I'm going to cast a spell, so it's harder to hit me, right? So then he just, close combat, he just eviscerates you. So I'm going to be playing against a similar list, I think, this Friday. And I've been thinking an awful lot about the way in which I play, which is I'm riding my war bikers up. And I think this is a throwback from like 5th edition. So ages ago, war bikers would drive up, they would shoot in the shooting phase, and then they would shoot again in the charge phase before the actual charge, right? As they're charging not before the charge, but before the actual combat, right? So you would get basically a double shoot. That's gone. But the habit that I have of just rolling my bike straight ahead, blasting into things to loosen it up, and then charging in. Because the truth is a war biker in close combat is basically a regular orc. Their toughness is still 4. They have a couple. They still have 2 attacks, a third attack with a choppa.
You mean strength is still 4? Because if they're on bikes, they should be tougher.
No, their toughness is still 4, even on their bikes. So, yeah, they didn't get a toughness boost. Oh, wait. Hold on a sec. No, their toughness is 5, but all orcs are like higher toughness now.
Okay.
All orcs are toughness 5 now. So they didn't get a boost to their toughness. All orcs around them did. So they're strength 4, but they have an orc profile fundamentally.
Okay.
So outside of, like, once you take a war biker out of shooting and put them into close combat, you effectively take away their strength and you take away the reason why they're so much more expensive. They have a higher move, but their DACA gun profile is extremely good. It has an 18-inch range, right? Good midfield shooting. It's a DACA, which means if you're within 9 inches, it shoots 5 shots at strength 5, 1 damage. But here's the thing, each warbike has 2 of those guns. So if you're within 9, you're shooting 10 shots you're only hitting on a 5+, but that's where the whole, clan culture comes in. That's why taking everything freebooter is so huge. Oops, my book just slipped. But the clan culture for freebooters, making that on a 4 is amazing. But if you have a unit of 6, you're throwing 60 shots out. So I mean, that's pretty good at strength 5. But if you have, but evil sons, right? If you do, or not even just evil sons, but if you have anyone that is if you have anyone that has the speed warg rule, so if your boss is either a boss on Warbike, which is a Forge World model, or it's the boss on Trike, right? When you call the what's it called, the speed warg, right? Each time an orc biker makes a ranged attack, you improve the AP characteristic of the attack by 1. So you give it a -1, and that happens for not just 1 turn but 2. And so my strategy of going forth. So fundamentally, if you're an orc, you call your speed warg on turn 1, and then you get this bonus for the first 2 turns. It's pretty powerful. And your warbikers, if you're evil sons, your warbikers are moving 16-inch base movement because you get the +2 for their movement. So you're moving and you're shooting. It gives them, with an 18-inch range, I mean, you're looking at like 18 and 16 is what, 34-inch threat range? I mean, that's pretty solid. That's basically across the board. But you're really going to be looking at a 25-inch threat range, because with the DACA rule, getting those extra shots is just going to be incredible. So my goal this week is to not put my close combat, my bikes in close combat. It's this mistake that I've made because you play aggressively. Bikes do better away from the enemy. They do better at 9 inches away. And that's, I think, where speed freaks can become so much more effective, because if you're going to do war bikers, you need to have at least a unit of truck boys, 2 or 3 really in a 2,000 point list. So if you screen those bikes with a truck, like even if it's an empty truck, if you drop the boys off and you sent the truck up to protect those, so they can't, they have to charge something other than those bikes. Or you could throw a stratagem that allows them to move up, blast away, and then move back, because there's the Evil Sons stratagem that allows you to spend a command point, or is it 2? And they get to move, shoot, move, drive by DACA. It's 1 command point. So it's pretty good to do that. And so my goal, and it's the same thing, sort of the same thing with buggies, I think, because my goal, I always take my silly old Mega Track scrapjets, and I always think like, oh, they have all this potential for mortal wounds on the charge because of all their spikes and their drills. It's just their shooting is better. So unless you have a model that's down to, like 1 or 2 wounds, there's absolutely no point to charge in your buggies. Those buggies are just way more effective with their ranged abilities. And I know that's crazy talking with a 5+ shooting, but the volume of fire that's going out.
Yeah, the volume is ridiculous when you're like, all right, cool. You got like those little Chessex packs that are like 36 dice, and you're like, okay, I gotta throw 2 of these.
Yeah. Right. And so when I, with this chaos, like this week, I'm going to play a similar list, and I am just going to do everything in my power, right? And again, like talking about knowing yourself and how you play, I need to make some changes, because again, this in 2022, sort of my, personal sort of gaming goal is to get to a couple tournaments as a player and not an organizer. But I also need to learn how to play more effectively with my units. And this is one of those things that's sort of a goal of mine, is to use units more effectively for what they're made for. War buggies, war bikes need to be shooting. And so that's sort of my treatise, if you will, on adjusting my game using the...
Let me ask you this, though. The melee profile for those bikes, for those buggies, do they have any AP on them? Because I'm assuming they have at least 2 attacks each with some AP.
So a chopper has an AP of -1. So a basic orc has a profile of 2 attacks, but with a chopper you get a 3rd attack. Your strength 4, and it has an AP -1 damage.
Okay.
With your things like your scrap jets, you have the nose drill that gives you, like 4 attacks, but and that has a -2 and a D3 damage. But you're still, unless you're hitting something that is significantly weakened already, you're just going to hit it and just pause. And then the next round, you're going to lose your shooting.
Right. I'm just thinking along the lines of, like, it's on, like, for the bikers that you mentioned with the 10 shots each bike. That seems to me like it could be a solid bully unit, right? Where you can harass, like, yeah, it's a large volume of fire, and it's definitely better in shooting, right? Because you just have a huge amount of shots. But they could also do some decent damage in melee. Nothing crazy, right? We're not talking like a bunch of power claws. But, it sounds to me like a unit of 6 of those should be able to maybe not necessarily wipe out, but do some significant damage to even, power armored Marines. Because especially if you call the speed wall and you're able to get, maybe like 15 to 20 wounds through that, your opponent has to roll, assuming they're not in cover or anything like that. And then you could kind of charge and finish them off. But it depends, right? It depends on the situation.
Well, I think with the Evil Sons specifically, and more so than the freebooters, because I play the Evil Sons. But I think if you have to balance out sort of the melee version of the army and the ranged attack. And I've been putting everything into melee whenever I get the chance, because they're orcs.
Yes.
But the truth is for the same price of 6 war bikes, I could probably get an entire unit of 15 Stormboys. And if I was going to be focused on melee, those guys move just as quickly. Not quite as fast. They move 12 instead of 14. But as Evil Sons gives you the +1, and so Stormboys don't have the speed freak rule, so they don't get the +2 movement. But you're still moving 13 inches, and then you can get a D6 movement at the expense of probably a mortal wound, very likely. And then, so you trade a mortal wound, you trade a 1 model for an advance move, and then you get a charge. And that's melee. I mean, that's close combat. You get a unit of Stormboys in there, and they're the sort of the choppers, right? They're going to chop things up.
Okay.
But your bikes aren't going to be able to do that much. If it's a 5-man Marine squad, I think they'll be fine. But if it's a 10-man Marine squad, if it has like 7 guys, you're not going to do it. It's just not. It just doesn't have the teeth. And like scrap jets, and your buggies, there are all these different wonky things that they can do. But the truth is, when it really comes to it, you want your probably setting up your scrap jets to take out armor, to take out the bigger, because they're the ones that have the high strength, right? They have the wing missiles and the rocket cannons that are all strength. You're shooting at knights, you're shooting at tanks. So you're all lined up, and then you're going to charge into that tank. And that nose drill isn't going to be enough to really take that tank out unless it only has 1 or 2 wounds left.
Yeah.
So
I'm just thinking along the lines of like, if you like, from my understanding of what you're basically telling me is, look, these units are really good at shooting. They're not the greatest. Like, you don't get them for their melee potential, which is okay.
No,
that's fine. And thus trying to, like, from what you're saying is you want to try to hold yourself back a bit and just not be like, all right, everything charges. No, I need to hold some of these units back because that's not what they're really there for. But I'm just thinking, like, you know, there's always going to be opportunities that, and this comes with experience as you play your list, and opportunities present themselves. Like, for example, you can get a possible opportunity where the opponent has a tank of some sort, and it's a, you know, deadly range tank, and what you can do is you could maybe not shoot it, but you get close to it, shoot something else, and then you charge the tank. You're probably not going to kill it, but you'll lock it up.
Correct.
And, you know, deny it a spot of shooting. So that might be more value even compared to having that bike unit shoot for your next turn. You know, it's either that or they're going to have to force to move out and, you know, and keep you locked in or something along those lines. So there's little stuff like that. And then, yeah, like you might happen to have like a weakened unit nearby, and you can try to charge and finish it off, you know, some type of bully unit. Maybe you're facing something like Eldar, and you can, you know, they're like T3, so you can easily go in and harass them with melee attacks.
Right. You know, but so I also, one of the mistakes I've been making is this Death Killer War Trike, which I've decided isn't going to be my war boss anymore. I'm going to use a Forge World model, which is just a war boss on bike. Because the war boss on bike actually has a higher toughness, because he's still sort of that throwback to, if you're on a bike, you get an extra point of toughness, and that's. But the Death Killer, he's really good at the 12-inch range, right? But his close combat attacks, just terrible, just absolutely terrible. It's like the Snagger Claw is not a power claw, and he doesn't have the option to take one. So he comes in and he's strength 7, which is pretty good, and -2 AP and 2 damage. But ultimately, you think that he's a war boss, he's going to go against like the big guys on the other side. He just doesn't have, even at toughness 6 with 8 wounds. When you're going against something big like a captain or a
demon prince or something,
a demon
like that.
prince, like those people hit back harder than he's going to hit, right? So I feel like in general, a Speed Freaks army has to be mobile. It has to be shooting. And you can throw truck boys. I mean, the truck boys are amazing at slowing everyone down. And they can be your melee. They can shoot up. You can give one of them, you can make one of them a truck boys specific mob, where they get to like move advanced charge turn 1. And you can join up with you can give whoever is leading your Speedwalk, whoever is your commander, can one of his commands is to make a unit move assault, move advanced charge. So you can get 2 units into the enemy's lines early, and then you can get set up and do everything in your power to just like set up that huge mid-range. And if you can pin everyone in the opponent's zone and keep them there, That's how this list, I think, wins. But as soon as if by turn 3, there's through your first wave and are moving on to objectives, and you've thrown your bikes and you're shooting into them instead of hanging them back to protect objectives, then ultimately they win, because they'll wipe your bikes out in close combat and then be able to take objectives. Whereas if you keep those bikes back, turn 4, you can still remove a unit from an objective, and that's how you keep the game in your hands, if that makes sense.
It makes sense. I'm just thinking along the lines of that would be, in general, in my opinion, difficult to do, because like you said, it's a 9-inch range for their best shooting.
That is true, but
so,
even if they're shooting at 18-inch range, they're still getting, each bike is getting 6 shots. So if you have 6 bikes, which is, I think, a good number, right? That's still 36 shots.
True, but as the game goes on, though, those shots are not going to be as effective because the speed wall is gone.
Correct. But if they're moving closer to you, then you get your 9 inches back, right?
So. True. I'm just thinking along the lines of just you want, if you're going to go for maximum effectiveness, they, depending on when you do your speed wall, which I'm assuming for most people it's going to be turn 1, maybe turn 2 the latest.
Yes, the latest.
Those models are going to be danger close. So anything that lives through that danger closeness, they're going to then turn around, and it's going to be easy for them, even for like a slow Necron army, to close a 9-inch gap and chop right through.
Right. So, I mean, when it comes down to turn 4, the hope is that you've done enough damage to kind of give those units a chance in close combat, right? Because if you have 5 bikers that are going in there on turn 4, hopefully you're not going into a unit that is at full strength, right? And I think that's sort of where they excel.
Okay.
I mean, there's just sort of some challenges for myself. And as time goes on, because like we've been talking about here, you have to know your list and play it multiple times. So I'm trying to, my ultimate goal is to figure out how this list works well, and not as a freebooter list, but as a Speed Freaks Evil Sons list, because that's the way I play. And I really won't shift that, I think, even for tournaments. That's the way I sort of geared this list for the heavy movement and the speed walk. So I want to make sure that I'm playing it learning how to make the best use of the Evil Sons rules, because that's sort of what I want to do, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and that's totally fine. Like, I have my Ravenwing list that is very similar to your Speedwa list. All bikes, everything's fast, right? I don't have any Marines that are on, foot slogging in any way. So everything's moving 14 inches minimum, right? So, and it's one of those things where I can't really charge. I have a handful of units that can do good melee, and then I have a unit that is okay at melee, but virtually everything is much better at shooting compared to compared to being in melee combat. But at the same token, they're all Marines. So,
right.
They can bully light infantry, because they're going to have at least like 3 attacks each kind of deal.
Right.
But yeah, I get exactly what you're saying, because at least from my perspective, a Ravenwing list is very similar in the sense that you want to be shooting because you don't really have anything that's good in melee combat. If I was like a White Scars army, that would be a different story, because they could take something that's not bikes and they could advance and charge, like with like Aggressors, for example, and be able to put in the hurt. But I do not have such luxuries.
Yeah, I actually, with the Black Templars, I had a bunch of new on sprue or new in box stuff that I had just been sitting around, and I've decided that I'm sort of getting out of the business of collecting and holding on to terrain indefinitely, and so I brought it back and returned it to the Warhammer store. And you can do that and but you have to spend the money then. And so I bought a box of Aggressors with sort of with my trade in, which was great because it was it was just good because I want some, and it's Black Templars, so I'll probably equip them with like the flamey things and see how that goes. But I don't know. So Aggressors interest me because they're this big, blocky unit that just like walks towards you and challenges you to like do something about it. So being able to have any sort of extra mobility with those like White Scars, that would be pretty intriguing.
Yeah, their ability to advance and charge is awesome. And then, if they're in the Assault Doctrine, they get an extra pip of damage. So, like, chainswords become 2 damage.
Oh, wow.
Right? So, they're a very strong Space Marine list currently because of that advance and charge and that extra damage if they're in the Assault Doctrine. So, it's pretty big. But, I mean, they're all... Most of the Space Marine chapters are viable for various different reasons, which is good. I mean, that's what you want. So
yeah. Well, it's funny. I was actually listening to the Badcast the other day. I don't know if you've listened to those guys. They were talking about how most of the new Space Marine books are like, the Space Marine book is good, but every like chapter, like Space, like Dark Angels, Black Templars, like anyone that has a specific book, like, they're all like Space Marines, like +1. And it just, they do everything, but they always have something they do a little bit better than Space Marines. So that's intriguing to me. But I don't know enough about armies that I'm still sort of digging into the Space Marine book and all these different units and seeing what I want to like put together, what might be fun, what might be thematic. So
yeah, and like especially if you're doing your Black Templars, right? They have those faith powers, their oaths, especially when you consider, like, what was it? One of them grants everything 5+ invul, right, across the board.
Yep.
Which would be great in the sense that you have units that aren't costed or they're not pointed with that 5+ invul in mind, and now they suddenly have it. So, for example, dreadnoughts, right? They're much, much more durable. Because that's one of the downsides of the dreadnoughts is that they don't have an invul typically.
Right, and I think Redemptors in a Black Templars list are almost not only thematically necessary, but I think heavy weapon necessary. So
yeah, and they're very capable. That -1 damage is very strong because you take stuff like plasma and autocannons and various other 2 damage weapons, and you've cut their effectiveness in half. Right. So somebody have to throw some serious firepower at you, or they're going to be, scraping, scratch fire at you all day, and that's no good. Either one is no good. Because I say that especially as I have 2 squads of plasma bikes, and they, whenever I have to deal with like a dreadnought or, God forbid, the not Death Company, Death Guard, because they have it across the board.
Right.
It's a massive, massive pain in the butt because now for the plasma to work, and so like it's like, all right, I have something that's big, it's deadly, and I need to kill it. I gotta overcharge it, and I gotta spend 2 CP, which also means that I gotta have a captain nearby, so that way I got rerolls and blah 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 blah. It forces me to invest a whole lot of resources to do And even though I've invested all those resources, I'm still not getting what I really want.
Right. Yeah. So one of the things I was thinking about doing was with the -1s, a full-on beast snagger list, because you get thinking about how much that -1 plays an effect with damage is, so with the snake bites, if you take snake bites and beast snaggers, what ends up happening is you only do damage on 4+ on a wound roll, and then on their HQs they have a rule called thick hide, and that's a rule that's spread about the beast snaggers, and they and it does the -1. So even if you have like a knight shooting at it with a super volcano cannon of doom, right? You hit this character, you're only wounding him on a 4+ regardless.
I think,
and
correct me if I'm wrong, that 4+ is anything, it's like ramshackle. If it's less than strength 8.
So,
and the reason why I say that is I faced a gentleman who had that, and he had like, a bunch of the beast snaggers come up, and he says like, oh, you can't wound me on anything better than a 4 if it's strength 7, basically. Because the unit was strength 6. Oh, sorry, toughness 6.
You might be right. You might be right with that. I'd have to dig into that again. I always forget that whole strength 8 thing. But yeah, I think that is the thick hide rule. Or not the thick hide rule, but the 1, 2, or 3 never wounds. So that's something I'd have to look into. But either way, you take what's a strength 7 weapon? That's auto guns. That's uncharged plasma. So you. But either way, I think about that generally as a way in which to another orc army, if I ever get to a third orc army, right, that might be something I end up doing, but just kind of spitballing here. That said, I want to take the next step and shift over and start talking about next episode.
Yep. So what we're going to do for the next episode, we're going to give a heads up for right now, is we're going to talk about a book. The book is going to be The Infinite and the Divine. So you guys can, you can get it on, it is in audiobook format. So like if you wanted to grab it, go grab it from Audible. If you want to get it straight from GW, have at it. Though I would definitely recommend Audible because it's much, much cheaper. But we're going to be talking about that book. That will include spoilers. So if you guys want to, be part of that discussion and listen and not have spoilers, this is your warning now. So that way when we go and talk about it next time, it's not like a big surprise. Though when we start going over spoilers, we will obviously mark that in the discussion, so that way you can drop out or what have you. So, but that is like homework. So that way, if you want to be part of that discussion, great. If not, that's fine, up to you. But we'll be talking about The Infinite and the Divine. It is a Necron-focused novel from their perspective. I've already read it, and I will say it's one of the best novels that I've ever read, or specifically listened to. And if you are going to get it, I would recommend listening to it rather than reading it. But that's just me. But we will be covering that.
Yeah. So I haven't listened to this book yet. I have it queued up on my Audible though, and we talked about this before. We hit the record button, but I don't. I am not sure that I've liked Necrons in the fiction very much. I feel like they've made them. I mean, they're Necrons, so they've in one of the sisters' books, the Necrons were sort of there, but there wasn't a lot of flavor or character. And kicking around in different books, Necrons pop up, but I just don't feel like there's been a lot of love. So I'm going to listen to this book, mostly because Tony has sort of thrown down the gauntlet. So we'll see. So we're both coming from this Tony has already said he loves this book. I don't know, and I have a little trepidation. So, then we'll talk about it in the next, and we'll see where we sit when it all. Oh my goodness, I can't even speak all of a sudden. We'll see where it all. We'll put our cards on the table the next time we record and see where we are.
Yep. And that'll be it. That'll be it for today.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone, for joining and listening to us. And I think I've figured out how to get on Apple. So pretty soon you'll be able to find us on Apple, but we'll also find us on Facebook at Good Morning McCraig. And we are also we also have our Discord, but we haven't been using much of it, but we'll probably get going with a few social media things now that we've gotten a few episodes in. So keep an eye out. I'll probably get an Instagram started in the next few days and see how it all shakes out.
All righty then.
All right.
Everyone have a good one.
Have a good one. Bye.